Hi, everybody, and welcome to Neuroscientists Talk Shop, UTSA's Neuroscience Research Podcast. Today is March 19th, 2026, and we're talking with Se-Woong Park. Se-Woong is associate professor, or soon to be associate professor in September, in the Department of Kinesiology here at UT San Antonio. Did I say kinesiology right?
Yes.
I always wonder if I'm saying that right. His laboratory works on the dynamics of human movement and the sensory motor mechanisms that control the dynamics of movement. And one area of his research is in the changes in sensory and motor processing that accompany autism spectrum disorder. So welcome, Se-Woong.
Thanks for having me.
Also with us is Hyoung-gon Lee, an associate professor in the Department of Neuroscience, Developmental, and Regenerative Biology here at San Antonio. Hyoung-gon has been on the podcast several times before. And I'm Charlie Wilson. So, Se-Woong, everybody wants to understand the nature of autism spectrum disorder, and it seems like it has so many different aspects, many different, behavioral and perceptual traits that accompany the disorder. And one idea is that each one of them is a different thing. And actually, we had someone here in the podcast just a few weeks ago who was saying that each one of them is a different thing. You have to hack them one at a time. But it's also possible that they're all manifestations of the same brain changes, because we don't know that much about how the brain produces behavior. So it could be. And so you are from a group of scientists who have advanced this idea that there is a unifying, maybe I'm overstating, but you can fix it. Yeah. But there is a kind of a unifying principle behind all of these things, and it is the brain's ability to establish expectations about what's going to happen, and that's what's not working completely right. So we base what's going to happen on what has already happened, and that's how we do everything. In fact, some people say that prediction is the only important job of the brain. We predict everything. We predict the trajectories of moving objects in space. We predict our own movements based on the brain command that we send to the muscles. And we predict the effects of our behavior on other people and the effects of other people's behavior on us. And we even are predicting the next word that's going to come out of somebody's mouth. And if they say something that isn't what we expect, we don't even hear it properly. So could you, this is a strong statement on my part in favor of prediction as being important. So, but could you give us a little review of what's known about prediction and autism spectrum disorder? And then we could talk about some of the experiments that try to test that idea.
Autism is known to be a disorder, but it cannot be explained by like one characteristic, right? Like if you think about other developmental disorders like dyslexia, or like aphasia, those disorders are based on the name. Literally, it's explained by one or two kind of origins, like what the disorder is related. But autism by itself doesn't really explain like how we can describe autism. But the DSM-5, the manual that psychiatrists use, has a clear criteria. Like one is the repetitive and restrictive behavior, and the other is difficulties in social communication. But it's not that simple if you observe autistic individuals and how different they are from each other in terms of how they manifest autism-related symptoms. So, I know you mentioned that, I'm kind of trying to address the idea of what would be the unifying theory or unifying or underlying mechanism that explain autism. But I don't think everyone would agree with there is any anything that will explain in that simple way. Especially those who have observed or diagnosed and treated those autistic individuals. So, but what I'm trying to do is just to make things simpler or to improve the notoriously heterogeneous symptoms that is shown. So I think Professor Pavan Sinha and other research groups have suggested idea of explaining the cause of autism in a more parsimonious way, which is something that has to do with prediction. But each research group has a subtle difference in terms of how they define prediction. But I think just to be a little specific about how prediction is defined, it could be a relationship between what is going on right now and what's going to happen in the future. And then if you have an ability to anticipate what's going to happen based off of what is going on right now, that could be prediction in a very a simplistic way to explain. But if you think about a mathematical definition, or what's really what is predicted and things like that, the things are going to be quite complex, and probably everyone has a little different idea, with each other.
So if we took all of the things that are considered autistic traits, behavioral traits, or perceptual traits, they don't all seem like obviously because of a prediction dysfunction. Could you give us an example about how some of those things like language difficulty could arise because of prediction?
Yeah, I think in the domain of language, many people observe some differences in autistic individuals in a way that they have some sort of a specific pattern of rhythm when they speak something, or in a layman's term, people usually describe autistic children as if they are just reading a textbook, or speaking like a robot. So the prosody or rhythm of the speech is a little limited, or it's kind of not as various as how non-autistic individuals usually speak, but that's more about some sort of a phenomenon that can be observed. But if you think about something that could be shown in language, or if I try to relate that to prediction, I think the prosody that I mentioned is related to interaction between a mom and a child, or something like that. And you can because the way that you put a rhythm into the language is a way to kind of add additional information to the language, and then that could be reflected by some sort of anticipatory action. And so that could be one example of language that could be explained by prediction. But just to add a little bit of the linguistic characteristics in autistic individuals, they also have a different way of reacting to parents or teachers. For example, they just answer some questions as if they don't understand the question, or the way they kind of understand the question is a little too narrow, or a little too broad. I think in many cases their kind of scope of answer is a little too narrow, or they don't really kind of view the situation in, like just like a story of or the narrative of the speaker, but it's more about like what is really going on right now, rather than what's going to happen or in relation to like, what is going on. So it's really if you think about the timeline or the time window of what autistic individuals think, it tends to be narrower as opposed to what we usually think. Because as I just talk right now, I probably kind of anticipate or have something in mind as to what you're going to ask as your next question, but it could be a little different, if you think about how autistic individuals communicate with each other.
So in a complicated sentence, I might not get to that point for a while, and I need to build the sentence up. And all of that time, I'm anticipating the last thing I'm going to say. If I'm a large language model, I might just use a few words to guess the next one. But if I'm a person, I might be using a long string of words before to calculate what the next one ought to be. And can we see that in language and speech production in autism? Like a shortening of the thought?
I would agree. Yeah, because it's speaking of like a large language model, I don't know the current status of a large language model these days, but it's probably what they react to humans has been more like an autistic way, in a way, because it's usually based upon the information that they have gathered, rather than anticipating what's going to happen, or so that's something that I would like to view in terms of like how similar the communication in autistic individuals and large language model or AI in general. And just going back to your question, I think we just have to be careful about like shortening the communication, but shortening the communication in a long-lasting narrative could be a way to that can be explained from the perspective of prediction, but logically I'm not sure if that's really that's really because of the prediction problem.
Anyway, language always comes up when we talk about autism, but that's not what you study. And so, another feature of autism is this hypersensitivity to sensory stimuli. And this seems like possibly simpler. Is there a kind of perspective on that that's offered by the prediction idea?
So I think it is, in a larger sense. It doesn't seem like hypersensitivity is something related to prediction, but when I say prediction, it's mathematically viewed as a Bayesian process and Bayesian inference. And usually when we make a decision, we need some sensory, like a prior or anything that any information that we can use when I react to that, or when I kind of make an action. And the hypersensitivity or like hyposensitivity can cause the idea of like how the decision-making system can be disrupted by the unusual scope of prior information or sensory information. And there are some studies that kind of argued regarding the kind of different way of perceiving or sensing, outside the world, and which causes differences in decision making, which requires some sort of anticipation.
Yeah, I was thinking about
Mm.
this famous "why can't I tickle myself"
Mhm.
problem.
Yeah.
If I move my fingers on the sole of my feet, this doesn't feel like much. But if somebody else does it in a way
Right.
that I can't predict,
Mhm.
it feels like a very strong stimulus.
Mhm.
And I was imagining if I wasn't expecting anything that happened, I didn't have any predictive ability about it. All of it would seem extremely intense.
Right.
And I'm wondering if that might be part of...
So I think that reminds me of internal model in motor control area. And these days, people, try to explain, given that our sensory motor system is quite slow, how do we kind of move our body in a timely manner? And scientists have suggested the idea of efference copy or corollary discharge, which is sending out like a predictive sensory feedback as we send out a motor command. And then the actual sensory feedback later can be compared with the corollary discharge or efference copy, which is predicted sensory information, and then the difference between the predicted and the actual sensory information, which is called sensory prediction error, is going to be used in order to update our next action. So we basically learn our kind of action based on the sensory prediction error. So that's been well known in the area of motor control. However, when I say some predictive differences in autism, it doesn't necessarily mean that, or the prediction that I refer to in the context of autism doesn't necessarily refer to that sensory prediction error. And there are many studies on whether the prediction is really mapping to that sensory prediction error, but I don't think there is clear evidence of the efference copy is really about the sensory the prediction issues in autism. But when I say prediction in the motor domain, it might be also like a motor planning or something at a larger scale, or the state estimation type of thing, which is separate process from the sensory prediction, send out sensory prediction. So it's
So
quite
what is that
complicated.
process you just mentioned?
The efference copy, or predicting the sensory feedback as I send out the information, as I send out a motor command to the muscle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you then made a distinction with something else that you think is more associated with autism.
Yeah. So just let me just go back to the tickling example.
Okay.
And that tickling example is actually something that could be explained by the efference copy, since we because we are wondering why we don't really feel tickling if you tickle yourself, right? And that is because we have efference copy as we take an action of tickling yourself. We have some predictive information sent out to the body or to the brain, so we don't have to really have any surprise as we tickle ourselves, so it can be cancelled out. So that's something that I'm trying to mention regarding the sensory prediction error or efference copy. But what I'm trying to say is that we don't really know what prediction or what is really different in autism regarding prediction, whether that is the sensory prediction error or efference copy that I just mentioned, or something in a more larger sense. For example, if you try to catch a fastball, you need to make a prediction to move your body. but that's not necessarily related to the efference copy. If you think about the underlying neural mechanism, many people are confused between the like a predictive process in our action versus how the brain predicts the sensory feedback.
So
yeah,
I think that's what I keep thinking about, since your seminar. So it sounds like, you telling that, because I initially thought about it, like what you describe in the prediction in the autism is something similar to like, hand-eye coordination or like, sensory input, like responding to prediction. But I think you saying that, that autism study you found it, the prediction is kind of independent under the sensory input then. Like some kind of internal kind of clock, kind of prediction timing kind of mechanism is different.
Well, that is the question we need to address, but it's not like I'm not saying what corresponds to the prediction that I'm studying. So
we could just use an experimental example of the kind of thing that you actually measure.
we need to. I think the presentation I made today, just testing like how to catch a ball, is more about like a starting point of like how or where the autistic children can make a difference, right? And we did find some differences when we see how they catch the ball. However, in order to understand the underlying mechanism of the catching behavior differences in autism, we really need to carefully design the experiment to test whether that differences are really coming from the like anticipatory mechanism in the muscular activation, or whether that really has to do with the sensory prediction or
there's two things.
Like that, right?
There's where is the ball going to be at any point in time, and then where is my hand going to be at some point in time. And so both of them involve predictive mechanisms, but one of them is strictly sensory, and one of them is sensory motor. So in your experiment, you're basically testing, you're trying to isolate the sensory part of it. Is that right? So you're trying to have the prediction of the trajectory of the ball.
Yeah, I think that's the case because as you mentioned in the previous question, I think I was trying to look at the motor aspect first, just to kind of address the question, like whether autistic children have some differences or impairment in the motor predictive motor behavior. I think that's kind of like a prerequisite that we need to observe, we need to test, and then and then the next question is going to be like, is it going to be sensory only, or is there any differences in the integration of sensory and motor part, or like it could be everywhere, right? We just don't know what is really underlying mechanism. So we are kind of like at a relatively rudimentary stage in terms of how to explain or how to even define what prediction is.
So how do you isolate those things? Like one of them, like if I'm just watching, I know a famous problem of a pitcher throwing a ball at you, and professional batters decide what they're going to do basically before the ball leaves the hand of the pitcher, or barely afterwards. And so that means that they have to they have to plot out the trajectory of the ball. Very difficult problem, but they do it. And that's strictly sensory. They don't really need to actually be batting to do that. Then if they are batting, they have to figure out how to get the bat at the place in that trajectory that they want. And those are two completely different things. And, just as a brain anatomist, I would think those are not in the same part of the brain.
Sure.
One of them is a visual cortex problem. One of them is a proprioception and motor problem.
Right.
And so if I have something happening in my brain that causes me to not be performing very well at one of them, it doesn't necessarily mean that I won't be performing perfectly fine at in the other. So how about, like, can we imagine experiments that would isolate those things?
Right. That's a great question, and that actually makes me kind of explain or introduce the arm raising task that I mentioned earlier, which doesn't really require like external stimulus, right? When you initiate your arm raising, I mean we do instruct them to raise their arm, so they actually do it upon a visual or auditory cue. However, it's not really about like processing the sensory information, which will affect their motor like prediction. So I think it's relatively well isolated compared to like catching a ball type of thing, or in any action in baseball, right? So, and just to give you a little more about that kind of information. So I mean that's what we label like an internal prediction, because we are studying whether there's any delays in the muscular activation while they are making a movement, which is actually something that is related to prediction, but it's not the prediction of like how we perceive, but it's more about how we control our posture in an anticipatory way, because otherwise we will fall. Yeah, so that's the type of prediction that we looked at when I tested their arm raising performance.
So you want to give us a short form of the outcome?
Yeah, we found that when autistic kids raises their arm, you can think of, we actually look at the arm trajectory kinematics, as we separate them, like for the acceleration and deceleration phase, and we didn't find any difference in the acceleration phase when they kind of make a ballistic movement, and then we found some differences in the deceleration phase, which requires, based on our model, computational model simulation, we found that it requires some sort of like predictive or anticipatory muscular activation to stably kind of stop the movement, terminate the movement at the top of the body, head. And that's where we found some differences between non-autistic and autistic individuals. And it was not only the kinematics, which is related to the movement time, but also the kinetics, which is their postural stability, as well as the muscular activation.
So in this case, they're raising both of their arms, and they speed up and then they slow down. And those, both the speeding up and slowing down, produces torques that tend to destabilize their posture.
Right.
And now they have to tighten some muscles in the right pattern to maintain their posture. So I guess what's being predicted is that force that's trying to destabilize them so that they can correct for it. So why only on the decelerating phase? Because there's destabilizing force on the accelerating part of it too.
Yeah, I think I have to be careful when I say like we found some differences only during the deceleration phase, is because it's probably just the degree to which the difference is shown, because when we look at the computational model of the arm raising movement, we found that the decelerating phase is actually riskier compared to when you accelerate your arm to the midpoint of the the height, and which is purely mechanical.
This is because the arms are up here. Is that right? So it makes a larger.
There are lots of things to consider, when you think about like why it's more risky when you terminate your movement.
Can you explain what the risky means? That it's going to
risky meaning that you're risky. You're like at more risk of fall.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So but because when you think about the direction of the torque and forces when you raise your arm, it's not just about the torque from the shoulder, but since it's accelerated, and also and we need to take those body segments into account, and there are lots of interaction forces in each joint, and with all that regards, it's really complex to think to like predict what's going to happen when you raise the arm.
So what do you do? You just put these into a computer model of the joints and bones, and
it's not like as complex as we take all those joints into account, but I think the current project we are working on only has like three segments, and we have shoulder joints and hip joints, and probably not really about the ankle joints, but even with those the shoulder and hip joints, it makes the model very complex, and using those relatively simple model, we found out that it's much more complex, or it's much more demanding in terms of how much we need to control our body while we are raising the arm. So for that reason, I based on the computational model, I can tell that you're at more risk of fall when you're kind of terminating your arm at the top. So I think going back to your question, it's again, we might be able to see some differences in the acceleration phase as well, because there is also some sort of like a risky moment at the beginning of the movement, but it also depends on like how fast they raise their arm. So but practically, it's fair enough to say that during the termination or right before termination of the movement, it makes sense that we can see most pronounced difference between the two groups.
So this is good evidence for a difference in autism in strictly motor control.
Right.
But you also have some evidence for there being a sensory component too.
Mm-hmm.
And could you give us a quick rundown on a typical example of experiment that shows a sensory?
So I think I need to go to the example of like intercepting an object, which is catching or bouncing or striking an object. And in that case, we need to take the ball trajectory into account, as we approach, to the object, and which makes the model, probably much more complex, and maybe in terms of the computational cost from the brain of themselves is probably much more than just raising the arm. But I'm not saying like which is more like computationally heavy, or like which is more difficult or easier. It's very difficult to say, that kind of thing. But in terms of like how many things you need to consider, when you try to intercept an object, that's probably more complex, or you need to think about much more things right?
One experiment I thought was convincing was actually, I think the virtual version of the experiment is is the easiest to understand. But you imagine a ball, a virtual ball, flying through the air, and you see its trajectory at the beginning, and then you can't see its trajectory for a while because there's something in the way, and then you have to predict where it's going to hit, and so doesn't have much motor component in it. You do have to do something to predict where it's going to hit, indicate your prediction, but it's probably, from a motor perspective, that's super easy. But compared to the actual prediction of where that ball is going to hit. So that's an actual experiment you did, and a valid one, and there was a autism effect on that too, right?
Right, that's correct. So autistic kids are showing less success rate when they're trying to do the virtual catching task. And we also found some sensitivity to the amount of occlusion, right? So especially in the autistic individuals. So that's the experiment where we can see some sort of interaction or like a coupling between perception and action. And we did additional experiment where we tried to minimize the motor demand, where we only asked them to choose where the ball actually landed. So the basic idea of the experimental setup was pretty similar to what you just described. But in that case, the ball landed one of the three locations, and then since the second half of the trajectory was occluded, it's quite challenging to anticipate where the ball would land, but it doesn't really require any like a reaction time or motor demand, because they can press the button that corresponds to each location at any time whenever they are ready to choose. So and in that case as well, we actually found some significant difference from the non-autistic individuals. So which suggests that even without the motor demand, the predictive demand task actually can distinguish between autistic and non-autistic children.
So if this turned out to be completely universal and to work really well, what would it tell us about what we should do about autism, if anything?
So I think one possible question is how specific the predictive difference or prediction differences is, like whether this is only for autistic individuals or any other neurodevelopmental disorders like ADHD or dyslexia or any other type of neurodevelopmental disorders can actually show it.
Or like again, I just kind of thought about that, like for example, like my son and daughter, they are very different kind of basically hand-eye coordination. One is poor and one is better. Is that the same thing, like a prediction, like you described it? So even not just a pathology, maybe each individual have a different level of that prediction mechanism, or it's totally different one?
You can definitely get better at catching a ball.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
No question about that.
Yeah,
right.
No question about like experience affects the the performance, right? And maybe those who are better at catching a ball has probably more experience with like playing a ball game.
So one of my questions is actually in the brain's view, like let's believe that. That's what I kind of keep thinking about it. Like a prediction mechanism is somewhere that coded and then the circuit working in the brain. That's how it kind of show up. Like like Charlie mentioned, that it kind of universal. It's not really kind of depend on the sensory or the motor kind of thing. And so then it's each individual like a different ability, like show up as like very similar to like what you test autistic children and then normal children like that. So then I'm just thinking about it, what is controlling that such a thing?
Mm-hmm.
And then also, if that's the same thing, like, that's why my first question, that what I saw in that just the normal difference is that exactly what you mentioned, because you said that that's kind of more pathologic, what I'm hearing, but I'm not sure that's really pathology. It's just kind of individual difference. But in autistic children, maybe in kind of, one extreme side. And then my second question might be, like you just mentioned, that whether the autistic children, by training, their prediction, that kind of mechanism can be also improved, or they cannot because their brain circuit is completely break up.
So, yeah, good point. But let me begin with the second point, because the one thing that I'm working on is the time estimation task that I briefly showed, this morning, which is, as the ball is flying, you need to stop the ball as you press the button. But to do that, you need to estimate the timing of the ball landing at a certain location, and you can only see the first half of the trajectory in that case as well. And I vary the speed of the ball trial to trial. So and it's similar to what like baseball players do. They need to predict whether when they need to swing the bat based on the prior sensory information, and it also can be learned, but also disrupted by the prior or previous trials, because usually the way how a curveball works in baseball is because it's the ball just became slower compared to the fastball in a previous ball, and people wasn't able to adapt to the slow ball, and I was able to find something analogous to that. And then when I look at the data, the performance from autistic individuals, they are actually not as sensitive to the previous experience in terms of like how to predict or how to stop the ball. So no matter whether the ball is fast or slow, the amount of error was quite similar. Whereas non-autistic children actually made a huge difference significant difference between the slow ball and the fast ball. So when they see the fast ball, the timing error was smaller compared to the slow ball. And another thing is the autistic individual wasn't able to update their performance in terms of the amount of error. Yeah. So, which is very interesting, because when I look at the spatial aspect of the estimation task, like the one that I mentioned previously, which is like estimating where the ball landed, and that's where the autistic kids was able to update their information. So it might be dependent on whether the information is temporal or spatial. Yeah, it's interesting, and I'm puzzled by that, and I found it very interesting, but I still need to understand and analyze more in depth about like where that really came from. But as you study more and more about motor behavior in autistic individuals, it's very interesting, and sometimes it's counterintuitive. And to address your first question, I think what we are trying to see is more about the degree to which it's different from typically developing kids. But I admit that the ability to predict external object really depends on each individual, even within the typical developing development. Yeah, and I think it's probably like our like height and weight, where we consider if my child's height is like less than 5 percentile or much extreme, then it could be considered as a some neurological issues. But otherwise it could be considered as a normal range.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is why these
Yeah.
things are called spectra.
Okay.
It's
Yeah.
because there's a big range.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Se-Woong. I really appreciate this. Looking forward to seeing the future of all of this.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, I'll be back another time.
Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
keep you updated on my research progress, and if there's anything new, then I'll
It's
let
very
you know.
interesting.
Thanks, Hyoung-gon.
Yeah, thank you, Charlie. It was very. Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Thank you
It's
for
been
having me.
Neuroscientists Talk Shop.